I'm Josh Peterson with 1620 The Zone, celebrating 25 years today with Michael Severe, who was a member of the Zone team from 2004 until 2014. 2019 until 2021. He's also still here. He also hosts Big Red Wrap-Up, Let It Fly, and Severe Reaction for 1620 The Zone on Sunday mornings. Michael, welcome back to 1620 The Zone.
Thank you very much, Josh. Or should I say, thank you, intern.
It is so good to have you. You are the second one of these that I have done. The first one that I did was with Matt Schick. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation because we had a different relationship, obviously, than Matt and I did. But I want to start the conversation the same way I did with him. What's your first memory of 1620 The Zone when you got into Omaha? How did you discover the radio station?
It was so easy. So every town I ever went to, whenever I traveled, and I moved a lot over the course of those about 8 years, first thing I would do is find ESPN Radio, right? Because you knew that was the one station that would have sports on, they'd have sports talk on. And so I find 1620 The Zone. And my wife and I, late 2002, all the way through I joined the show, we would listen to the movie segment of whatever Kent was reviewing.
Yep.
And whatever was in the paper for the new restaurant, we would go to that restaurant and go see that movie. God, we did that for years. That was our date night. It was just what we did. A number one memory outside of Kent's Movie Club or whatever you guys call it now. Kevin told a story about a mouse at his house and how his wife was in the kitchen up on the little median thing, up on top of that, as this mouse was terrorizing everybody in the house. Daughters were running. He was trying to get it. It was a 20-minute story, but it was so well told that I was just captivated by it. And that's the first time I really remember listening to Kevin and going, oh, this guy's really good. He's really entertaining.
Bob Bruce leaves. There is a 6-month period where Kevin is running through a bunch of co-hosts. When does this job come on your radar as something that you could do on a regular basis, but also still work with KETV in the mornings?
So I was listening to Kevin. I listened to him do the show, and I heard a bunch of the people trying out. They had the guy who was the take writer for Rome, Pete Thompson, who was a TV guy who now is up in Philadelphia, New Jersey area. He tried out. Neil did the show with him for a couple of days.
Wow.
The voice of God was doing the show with him. And so I was listening through all that, so I knew what was going on. And they called over to Channel 7 and talked to John Oakey. But John had 2 sons who were coming up into their teenage years. And he's like, well, I got that, my stuff at the church. What about Severe? He's a sports guy. He could do it. Neil called me, brought me in. I did like a half an hour in his office where he just asked me a bunch of questions about steroids in baseball and all kind of stuff. And then I did an hour on the air with Kevin. I've racked my brain. I don't remember what we talked about for that hour. I just remembered having the conversation and thinking, this guy's a little quirky. And we were opposite in everything.
Everything.
So opposite that I love sour candy. Kevin loves hot tamales. What's as farther apart as anything? And then about a week later, they called me and offered me the job. It was funny because, you know, I didn't have kids yet. Where my wife was at work, she was working a regular job back then, so she was going to work at like 8 and work until 5:30. And so I had that window of time where I had nothing to do.
Yeah.
It was perfect. It was absolute perfect. That job came along at the perfect time in my life.
Your career at that point, as you said, you traveled around the country. Did you do radio in college? Is that
So,
what?
yeah, I DJ'd FM.
Okay.
I did FM. I did a couple morning shows. I did the Hump Day morning show on the Wednesday mornings.
Nice.
I was Father Collins. I DJ'd a funk show on the weekend. I did a lot of TV sports. I anchored. I covered sports. I was a sports reporter for a number of years. When I was in Albuquerque, kind of the same thing happened. They had 1610, the sports animal. Occasionally, I would call into that. They let me fill in a couple times because a friend of mine who worked for the TV station also did radio, kind of like I did here. And so I did a couple times on that. But I had never literally done a show by myself until 3 days after I started and Kevin went on like a 2-week vacation. We had this phone system that was very complicated on how to bring people up. I didn't know how to get the break. I mean, I didn't know how to do anything. And luckily, Stacy was here. I had so many guest hosts. Scott Frost, Aaron Graham, Lance Brown did a couple of days.
Backflip Lance.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, man. It really was a whirlwind because remember, I was going to work at about 3:30 in the morning at Channel 7. I would leave Channel 7 usually about 11:30, noon, and then I would go home, eat something, maybe take a little nap, and then come in and do 3 to 6 back then. So it was
crazy.
And then we went to the point where we got earlier in the morning show. We backed up till 2:30 in the morning. And we went then 2 to 6.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. By the way, during that 2007 season, we started at 1 o'clock for 2 of the shows, Oklahoma State and also Kansas.
What do you remember about those early days in terms of your relationship with Kevin, trying to form and trying to find that chemistry on and off the air?
It was a little hard. There were times where we didn't get along great, Kevin and I. I think Callahan doing football every day and just getting to know each other better and appreciating each other.
One of the things that you are very much alike, though, is in your preparation. Was that something that you maybe recognized in each other of like, okay, we're both putting in a lot of work, and so there's going to be an appreciation from each side?
I learned that from Kevin. You know, as a live TV reporter for, 16 years, there wasn't a lot of prep. You could do a story for the day before and put it together, but many times when you walked in, it was breaking news. You were just going out and learning and reporting. And so that's the person I had become, and that's what I was. When I got here and I watched Kevin, not just prep for the show, but prep for UNO football, that also kind of brought us closer. I would go and sit in the booth and listen to him do games. But I learned preparation from Kevin. I had a football book. I had a baseball book where I went in there and looked up stuff to be able to use on the show. Now, obviously, it's Google it, and I'm looking it up. It's so completely different. So I started in TV news in 1995. So we were ripping stuff off of the AP and UPI wires. The day that Tupac died, I remember sitting in a newsroom and hearing the alarm go off for the wire. That's how you got information. Information now hits your phone the second after it happens.
Hey, TMZ reported this.
Exactly.
Was there a moment in those early years where you started thinking, there's something here?
End of 05, beginning of 06, we knew the show was clicking, that people were listening. We had a little bit of competition that came in that tried to be a part of it, and it was joyous to beat them in the book, badly. That was good. But as 06 went along, first of all, let me say this. I had no idea who Jim Rose was other than we went to the same church. That's all I knew about him. I didn't listen to the radio games because I went to the games where I watched him on TV, so I didn't know who he was. When all that started, first of all, a little uncomfortable for me because I'm sitting next to him in church. I was like, what is all this happening? Because you had stuff coming from Lincoln, and you had stuff coming from here, and then there was the whole Vision and Tiny. And again, I wasn't getting a lot of sleep at this point. I didn't know what was happening. That kind of grew and just exploded. You know, every Monday after the game, the most popular song ever in the history of Nebraska sports radio, The Same Old Story.
Yes.
We did The Same Old Story open 40 times.
So many times.
So many times. Same old story. And that's what it was. The mixture of all the funny stuff that was happening. And then when shit got involved, I said, it'd be kind of funny if we did foreign Callahan. You do Callahan as Callahan, but we have him say foreign stuff. So I gave like 3 or 4 of them to Schick. Schick goes in the booth, and Schick comes out with like a dozen of them. Just hilarious ones, including the one that... Think about this today in 2024. Hi, I'm Michael Severe.
Yeah.
That's something that you couldn't do on air now. Well, half the stuff you couldn't do on air, but that's definitely one that you couldn't do on air now. By that point, it was just rolling. It was so easy to. We basically turned on the microphones and just went. Another thing that we did was assigning guests to the same spot. And so we had our people, and so we were like, you're going to be on at 4 o'clock on Mondays, and you're going to be on at 5 o'clock. And we started that in...
Like regular guests.
Regular guests, yeah, because that wasn't what we did before. Every day it was something different. Yeah, we didn't have regular guests.
They used to talk a lot of different sports in the Kevin and Bob days, and once it was you, it was really heavy into football.
Yeah, they did. A lot of baseball.
And NASCAR. Did you say they would even talk NASCAR?
There was NASCAR going on because that was Bob. It's basically the college stuff. And then there was some random sports they would talk. We really kind of narrowed it down. It was a conversation we had, and we were like, what's this show for? Who's this show for? What's the show about? What we came up with was it was a show for guys. And everything that guys are about. Women, sports, food. So if you do all of that, and obviously it wasn't just guys that were listening. We had the chick listeners, right, that were calling up. But we wanted to do a show that was about what guys like, what guys want. And that was the goal of the whole thing. It was good. I think in general, if you ask people, they laughed the majority of the show. And then they got a lot of information, too.
What do you think of first when you think of that 2007 season?
The bowl game of nowhere. 07 had a lot of anticipation, a lot of it. Now, there was a lot of debating about that season, too. You know all that happens in the season. The USC game, they put everything into it. It goes badly. Nothing goes well. When we're sitting there talking about what we could do, and let's have him against another team who's gone to so many bowl games but not going. That's Notre Dame. And so he does a simulation with Nebraska playing Notre Dame. We advertise it that week. It's going to be fun. And when we get there, place is packed. We walk in, and Sonny says to me, we're in trouble. We're running out of beer. And I'm like, what? They open up the piano room, which was on the backside, so they could have people in there. It's jam-packed. And people are watching this video game, the bowl game of nowhere. They're watching it on the screen, and they're just, every time something happens, they're like, yay! Doing the song for Nebraska touchdowns in a video game. It's still the craziest day. They had people outside wanting to get in. They had too many people. They couldn't let people in for it. But that was kind of the peak of the show. And it's funny because it was the worst of times.
Yeah.
But we had a good time. We had a good time every single week after every worst of times. And I think that's ultimately what the show was about during that time. It was trying to help people as, mental health counselors through what was happening with Nebraska football and Bill Callahan.
When you arrived, you guys had some characters, and there was also a lot of the rivalry with Kevin versus some of the people inside of the Nebraska system. How important was that, do you think, for the show developing like it did? Like Matt said, if we're around in the Mike Riley era, it wouldn't have been as fun.
I thank Bill Callahan for providing Bill Callahan. I mean, could you have the coaches really say that without Bill Callahan saying the things that Bill Callahan said? So there were other little characters. There was this guy who, Husker hater, Missouri fan, huge Missouri fan, who I became pretty good friends with online, still occasionally on Facebook. The message boards were a character of the show. We didn't have Twitter, but we had places where people could go and complain about our show or complain about the coaching staff or complain about our wives, whatever else. There was some mean stuff that happened on some of those message boards. People were getting banned. You had secret message boards. You had the Samsonite board, which was an offshoot of the Husker Talk board, which was an offshoot of the Husker Power Hour board. It was just a big character in the show. And that's where the message board post of the day comes from, because there were so many silly things being said. Like, we should put this out there, things that they're saying, and we'll make it a skit. And that was a big part of the show. And then the assistant coaches. The Carl stuff was just hilarious. But Poochis was a good character, too.
Oh, yeah.
There was so many parts of it. I'd say those are the biggest characters. It was the people who hated us, the message boards, and then all of the coaches that came along.
So you're working at KETV as well throughout some of this period.
Until 10.
Were you fried? Like, what happened that led to you coming full-time to
No,
the
man.
Zone?
No, I was fine doing it. I was great. I'd gotten kind of in a rhythm. I really enjoyed it. So what happened was I said things on the radio that I thought were funny. Other people thought were funny. I did this whole breakdown of what Nebraska's recruiting advantages were. We don't have the sea or the ocean, and we don't have sunny days, but we got big booty white girls. And that's what sells. Well, the then general manager of KETV was a woman, and she did not like that. She heard about it. Then she started listening to the show. She made me make a choice. She said either do TV or do radio. So I'm like, okay, fine. I quit. I had been wanting to be in TV my whole life. I wanted to be a news reporter. I wanted to then be assistant news director, and I wanted to be a news director in a medium-sized market so I could help young reporters. That's all I wanted to do with my life. And so when 2010 comes along and I had to make that decision, it was really hard because I knew if I left TV right then, I was never going back to TV. I got a lot of offers after that, but I never went back to TV. I stayed, did the radio thing. It was tough, man. It was a tough decision, but I didn't want to leave. I was happy doing both of them. I really liked it.
When those final years, or what we now know to be the final years of the show, start happening, like, is there a time where you're like, I don't know how much time we have left together, so I'm going to either try to enjoy this more, appreciate it more, or whatever it is?
Kevin started doing preseason NFL. Right about then, that's when I started thinking about maybe Kevin doing this full time. But then when
Somebody
the
died.
Philadelphia Eagles guy, who was their play-by-play guy, died and he got the NFL, then I kind of felt it. But when he called me that day, I remember I was in the kitchen. I knew immediately what it was, but I was surprised. At the time, I thought, okay, the show's going to go on. It's going to be the same thing. And working with John was great, but it was really different. And I didn't realize how different it was going to be until it happened. It was an emotional thing. That last day, we had on one of the professors from the university.
Rick Alloway
called in. Bob called in with Bob
yeah.
on. We had the guy who was the owner of Lancers. He called in. Jed did a poem, and that was it. And he went on to do great, be great. And then I went with John, and John and I were together for 2 full years. And then the World Herald called and came up with an idea that I was like, oh, that's interesting. It was fun doing that. But I always missed the Zone. I missed TV and I missed the Zone because of this now. Having other people around while you work is incredible. I loved working here. It was a great job, one of the best jobs I've ever had.
Yeah.
And then came back, and you asked about being burned out. I knew probably a month into COVID that I was done because I was so happy I wasn't having to watch sports. We were watching movies together as a family. We were going on these walks. We were doing things that we really had never done. I thought to myself, this is what it would be like if I wasn't doing sports talk radio and I was doing something else. Then I worked a whole nother almost year. And it was hard. I feel bad for Damon. I was burned out. I was having to force myself to do a lot of prep to watch sports, to get involved in conversations that I had no interest in anymore. That last 6 months was really hard.
I've always been surprised that you're still involved in sports like you are today. Why do
Husker stuff. I like being able to dip my toe into the Husker stuff. I enjoy football, but I don't want to watch baseball anymore. I don't watch baseball anymore. I watch a little bit of the Sixers, what's going on, but I watch very little of it. I follow Nebraska basketball and Creighton basketball and the Big Ten, college football in general. And that's fine for me. That's enough for me. It's a ton for me. Any more of it, I couldn't do.
Everyone always probably wants to talk to you about the Kevin and Michael era, but the John and Michael era, it's obviously much shorter.
Yeah.
What do you think about when you think of your guys' time together and that relationship?
Well, first of all, it was going to be me and Schick.
It was.
Right?
Yep.
And we had done a press release already
saying
that Schick was going to take over on unsportsmanlike conduct, and they had these fake quotes that we didn't say and everything. We were actually having lunch when he told me that. I'm going to Pittsburgh because my aunt died. He called me to tell me that wasn't true and that he had gone to Charlotte for the interview. And I said, well, is it in Bristol, or is it in Charlotte? And he says in Charlotte. I was like, you got to take that. North Carolina's cool. You're going to love that. You're going to be away from the bosses in Charlotte. It's a great idea. And probably the next day, he called me to tell me that he was taking the gig. We had no idea where we were going after Schick said no. Really, we didn't. And I remember sitting in the parking lot here talking with John on the phone and asking him if he would do it. At that point, he said they had conversations, he and Chris, about moving here. We had that conversation, and he said, well, I got to talk about it with Chris. We got to figure this out if we can do it. The next day, he talked with Jack, and he came back and he says, yeah. He says, I'll do it. I said to him, I have nowhere else to go. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'll be doing for a long time. I wouldn't have left. Literally, the managing editor of the newspaper was my next door neighbor. And for 2 years, he kept offering me jobs. And finally, he comes up with this idea. He tells me, Boston is doing internet radio. And it was right when they had the thing that happened at the Boston Marathon. He showed me how everybody else was scrambling, and they immediately went live on the internet, this internet version of the Boston Globe, I believe it was. And I was like, that's a great idea. Immediacy of being able to go on the internet. So I talked to him for about 3 or 4 weeks with it. I said, you know what? It's something new. Why not take a shot? But that was something really different.
It is.
That pulled me away, or we'd have stayed doing it forever. We probably would still be doing it. And I remember having the conversation with John because they were trying out, talking about other people that might be getting the job. And I was like, it just makes sense to go to Josh. What's the Dragon show called again?
House of the Dragon?
No, the
or
first
Game
one.
of Thrones.
So Game of Thrones. You're part of this family, And so this king hands down to this. And that's what it was. It was just a part of the family. What happened with John had worked with Kevin in college, and it was just this little family. So it made sense to just go to you. It just made sense. And that's what I thought.
Do you regret leaving it all?
In the end, I do wonder what would have happened if John and I would have stayed together for longer, because I think we were kind of hitting a pretty good groove, and I think it would have just gotten better. Now, Grumpy John weighs on you occasionally.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Grumpy John is a little difficult to deal with occasionally. Look, I portray a grumpy guy. He is a grumpy guy for real life. And so that was a little difficult. But no, the show was fun. We had a good time. I think we ended up having pretty good chemistry at a point. Sometimes you have to move on and try other things so you can learn exactly what you miss or what you need to have. So.
Yeah. Were those glory years with Kevin? Is that like your favorite time working as an adult?
No. It was really great.
Yeah.
I worked at a pizza place.
You've talked about this before.
I worked at a
times.
pizza place in Houston. It was Regis Pizza. There were 3 or 4 locations, and that was the most fun I ever had.
Yeah.
The pizza place, especially back then, was just like you'd see if there was a TV show about it. There were quirky characters. There was crazy inner office relationships happening. There were crazy things happening when you would deliver a pizza. It was just the nuttiest time. And I had a blast. Always had cash. It'd be 2 o'clock in the morning. We would leave and go to this pool hall that was open till 5. And we would drink and we would shoot pool and we'd spend all our tips. That was just an amazing time. By the way, I was working a job at Kroger during the day. Many times I rolled into Kroger in the morning and I hadn't gone to sleep. That was the most fun I ever had. The most fulfilling job was, those years were incredible. Go back and just examine those weeks. Here's week 6 of the 2006 season. Here's what happened. And young people be like, what?
Yeah.
Every single week, it was an absolute adventure. It wasn't like that time at the pizza place, but it was pretty darn good.
Those years, and to see what has happened since then, I mean, I imagine someday going to like a college class and seeing like, so like the guy who does the NFL games and the guy who does this and they were all at the same radio station for 3 years, and it's such a bummer that it was only 3 years.
Yeah, so I'll never forget that day. We're in the meeting in that room back there, and we're discussing whether or not the station could support a midday show, and could a midday show work could Schick and Nick work first? And then, of course, Nick by himself is a midday show.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to people that I was in Albuquerque. They did 6 to 6. It can be done. There's enough people, enough media, enough for us to cover. We can do it. And each time people push back, whether it was Schick and Nick or when it was Nick's show as the midday. But it was great times because, and here's the thing, all those years of me working in a newsroom, in a TV newsroom, I did not have the same competition thing that Kevin had or that Schick had. I didn't have that. We're a team. That's how I thought about it. Playing on sports teams, being in the Army, working in the newsroom, we're a team. I didn't have that. I watched it. We were on the same station. We're going into the same books. They were really competitive with each other. And it was fun to watch.
Yeah.
I wasn't a part of that. But I did admire from the day one that Schick and Nick started and how they started. I admired what they did in the show because it was different than us. Yes, we had fun. But we weren't, and silly's not a bad thing. I'm going to use the word silly. It's not a bad thing. They were silly. The former GM guy or whatever his position was, he was right in a way. They were for a much younger audience. His problem was he didn't realize the younger audience would age. Anyway, it was incredible to think about. When I see Nick doing a national game, I'm so happy for him because I know that's what he's always wanted to do. I don't know how many times I've turned on the radio and heard Schick or watched him and thought, that's so cool. He's exactly where he wants to be. I listened to Schick when he would call in to the Rome show and do the smack off.
Yeah.
I listened to Matt from Lincoln. And when I met him, I remember him telling, or Matt from Boulder, I remember him saying, I was Matt from Boulder. I was like, you finished like 7th one year. I remember that. And so that, and then of course Kevin and what he's doing and how successful he is. No, it's awesome. It's incredible to think what this station has produced. And it's a bunch of hard workers. It's a bunch of people that work really hard and advance to where they wanted to be. It's awesome. Now, I never made the Hollywood Squares. Never did. But, I'm very happy with what I do now. And I'm very happy to see all those people successful.
Yeah. Michael, this has been a real pleasure, man. It's so fun to talk to you. Michael Severe, host of the Big Red Wrap-Up, the Let It Fly podcast, Severe Reaction, and the executive director of the Jet Award Foundation, which I did not mention in the intro. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, intern.
Thank you to Michael Severe. To hear more stories and memories from the last 25 years, go to 1620thezone.com/25 years.